Now, the company tasked with creating a new funding model for the South African Broadcasting Corporation, that's the SABC, has requested an extension for its project. The Department of Communications and Digital Technologies appointed the group to develop a funding model for the SABC. This happened last year, September. The SABC Bill aimed to provide a new funding framework for the public broadcaster. Now, the SABC primarily relies on advertising for funding. Communications and Digital Technologies Minister Malatsi has said that once the funding model has been completed for the SABC, he will seek the concurrence of the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana. For more on this, we are joined by the Minister, and it's good to have him here on the program. Minister Malatsi, thank you for your time. Thanks for talking to us this morning.
Good morning, Leanne, and to all the Morning Live viewers.
So, Minister, let's just begin by getting a reason as to why BMIT sought to extend the deadline from what was meant to be the 15th of December to now February 6th.
Yes, the context for that request the request by BMIT for an extension was to take into consideration that there were several engagements, particularly consultations that they ought to do with stakeholders. And given that there is the disruption towards the end of the year with the festive season and anticipating that some stakeholders, for a variety of reasons, may be ending their year in the middle of December and then opening up towards, either the second week of January, that they anticipated that may be disruptive, that in order to be able to do sufficient and thorough engagement of the key parties who we believe and they believe are very instrumental towards shaping views and getting their views on the formulation of the funding model, that they sought that extension. And when that request came, I felt, and together with the department, we felt that it was a reasonable request and that it should be acceded to, particularly given that it is important that we do the right thing and we get to a position that is informed by a variety of views of stakeholders, and most importantly, one that can enrich what the final or the proposal on the funding model would be. It is importantly, and to also take into consideration that because it will be impactful on funding, the concurrence of the Minister of Finance, as you indicated in the prelude, is important in that. So part of the process is, upon the formulation of that, we would then have to present what is the proposal for an engagement with the Minister of Finance, simply for the reason that anything with a financial implication, particularly on the public sector, is something that we must engage with the Minister of Finance.
So let's get real about this. The SABC does, of course, find itself in a very precarious financial position. There are concerns about the slow pace of progress. So we talk about the deadline being moved to the 6th. Then, of course, we have to still get the approval from Enoch Godongwana, our finance minister. This whole bill needs to be finalized and accepted. What is the time frame we're looking at here? Because while this is all taking shape, things at the SABC are looking very, very difficult if you look at the latest financial results.
I mean, yes, and that is recognized, and it is important to also be realistic in dealing even with the immediate pressures that the SABC is facing. It is something that we're all fully cognizant of, but it is also equally important, Leanne, that you don't rush an exercise that might not be, that might not come up with a credible solution simply to meet the urgency of now. I think we are trying to do a balance here, a balance of responding immediately to the pressing needs and making sure that at the end of the day, we come up with a credible solution. And we are dealing with an issue that has emerged out of, a history of several issues that have contributed to where the SABC is. And I think it is important and fair game that in understanding the magnitude of the problem that we are facing, that we also have the patience to produce solutions that will help deal with the pressing problem, because it can be that there is a sense that all of these initiatives should be a panacea that is baked immediately and tomorrow, because government has processes, particularly on issues of finance, on issues of budgeting, that requires, compliance, that requires that there is consultations with Treasury, and that requires that when those resources are allocated, they are done within the processes of government, and that is how it has always been done. And it is not a creation of the seventh administration.
Yeah. So let's be realistic now, and let's look at the environment that the SABC broadcasts in. We of course, as the SABC, have a public mandate, and you know it as well as I do, and the viewers, of course, it's universal access, it's local content, it's educational program, it's election coverage, it's taking major events live, and all of this has to be funded through advertising. And advertising, unfortunately, when we talk about commercial advertising, we are now competing with the likes of YouTube, Netflix, all of these streaming services, that people do this and they watch this and they stream it uninterrupted. And yet our funding model is something almost out of a past era. This is a matter of urgency, because it does feel that at the end of the day, we still have to reach a mandate, but we've got to do it in a way where we meet non-commercial obligations. How do we balance that? How is it possible to balance this?
Yeah, and I think it's also just important to correct something, because you've consistently made the point about urgency, and it seems to imply that, either the department or government isn't taking this as a matter of urgency, which is something that I don't think it's accurate. We've gone on this venture particularly to appoint a service provider that has the expertise to help government in developing or presenting options for a funding model that then have to be considered in the realm of the fiscal realities that the government face. Of course, we are dealing with legacy issues and the evolving space of, public broadcasting and media broadcasting, which has been, challenged significantly so by the evolution of digital media. There is, widespread consensus for anyone in the broadcasting space around the burden, I would dare frame it that way, of the public mandate. And I use that to say that, for every obligation that is imposed on anyone, more so the public broadcaster, that must be matched by the level of funding, right? And I think it's a conversation that even within layers of government is something that we are grappling on in order to maintain the fair balance, because you still need a public broadcaster for the reasons that you have outlined: universal access, for making sure that educational programs, for making sure that there is wide reach access for this. None of these things come free. They bear a cost, including national events, including broadcast of sports activities or sports rights. All of this come with a cost. And I think the reality of the environment requires that everyone in the chain, the government, that is why we are looking at the funding model and how to best make sure that there is proper and adequate funding for the size of the mandate the public broadcaster has, so that it can also compete with the over-the-top broadcasters that are in the space, and even with the commercial broadcasters, because ultimately in this space the competition is around the quality of content, which is what drives audiences and attracts eyes, and to a greater degree also influences advertising spending. But I think the other thing is also looking at, given the reality that you've highlighted, that the public broadcaster is also not in the position that it was 30 years ago, 20 years ago, or 10 years ago. So there's also got to be look in terms of what are some of the adjustments internally that can be made to ensure that, we maintain the strategic importance of the SABC and make sure that we empower it to function optimally. so that when we talk about the SABC, it's not always about, its precarious financial situation or its ailing infrastructure, but it's also about some of the great and commendable work that it does in making sure that news reaches every corner of the country, including even broadcasting to the continent and the region, and making sure that citizens can access entertainment, information, and educational programs.
Yeah, indeed, and that's something that I'm glad you emphasize, because there's a dedicated team that works behind the scenes day and night to ensure, with very small means, to ensure that what you're talking about and that mandate is met. I mean, when we look at this, we see that obviously the funding is difficult. Advertising is declining. That goes without say. TV licenses have all but collapsed. I mean, we're seeing that of everybody, about 20% of the country actually play television licenses. And bailouts are unsustainable. So this is the environment that we live in. Now we've been hearing, and whether or not, you please correct me if I'm wrong, but there have been rumors and the talk of a possible broadcasting tax or something along that, a broadcasting levy or a tax. Is this possible? Is this something that is being mentioned?
I wouldn't say it's government position. It's, people with views about, several ideas on what the future of funding should be. I think our approach is that, let's await the final report that is being presented by BMIT in terms of the options that are on the table. And even when that is presented, that has to still be, assessed and interrogated together with the Minister of Finance and Treasury in terms of the fiscal realities that the government face, and then we take it from there. I think there's always going to be different ideas that are being ventilated in the space about what the best model of funding would be, and those represent individuals' views. I think our responsibility is to make sure that we are mindful of several things. I think if you just generally look in terms of our country's economy and just the disposable income within households, the idea of any additional tax on households is something that would not gain favor with a lot of residents. I think we saw this particularly even around the discussion on the value-added tax possible increase and the kind of debate that is sparked in. I think the ultimate conversation is going to be about, if it's about any contribution from users and consumers of broadcasting, it's gotta be one, the fairness of the formation of whatever amount will it be and how that is collected or contributed, because over and above that, I think as a country, South Africa generally, or the public broadcaster in this case, there's been a massive challenge with compliance on TV licenses and probably weaknesses in the form of collection. And this is just not limited only to this. I think even if you look in terms of what prevails in other industries, I think for a long time the country scrambled with illegal electricity connections, which just showcases parts of the population's defiance of anything has to do with paying for services. But in other areas, for instance, such as motor vehicle licenses, the compliance is high because, if you haven't paid for your motor vehicle license and you get stopped by the cops on the road, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. All right. Minister, I'd love to speak more about it, but we have to wrap up very quickly. But I cannot end the interview without talking about the latest on Starlink, because that, of course, has been a major talking point. And we saw, the latest on it, obviously, is your department issued a policy directive to ICASA instructing it to align telecom licensing rules with the National ICT Sector Code, effectively allowing equity equivalent investment programs rather than strict 30% local ownership. What is the latest on this? Are we able to sort of confirm or not confirm? When is Starlink coming? Is it coming? Is it going ahead? What's the latest on this?
Look, I think there's often an obsession with this conversation to limit it to one particular company. And I'm glad you asked the question, because the policy directive is not, framed or initiated to appease one particular company or to make an exemption for one particular company. Equity equivalent investment programs are applicable and are provided for within the empowerment, the economic empowerment laws of the country. I think if you look at the BBBE Act, it makes provision for two ways for any prospective international company to enter South Africa through, 30% local ownership or equity equivalent. So what the policy directive has sought to do is, because there is misalignment with the ICT sector codes, which makes provision for the recognition of equity equivalent investment programs, and what the regulations of ICASA, which was formulated in 2021, in terms of exclusively limiting ownership to local ownership. So ICASA, obviously, since the gazetting of the policy directive, is considering the policy directive, because that is how the legislation works. It says that the minister can issue a policy directive which ICASA must consider. So ICASA will, use their internal processes to consider the policy directive and then make their final determination. And as a constitutionalist, my role is to make sure that we use the legislative channels and respect those outcomes whenever they come.
All right, Minister, we leave it there. Thank you for your time. Thanks so much. Enjoy your holiday. I know you're still on a bit of a break, but
thank you very much.
We really appreciate you just chatting to us. That's our Communications and Digital Technologies Minister, Malatsi, speaking about Starlink as well as the funding model for the SABC. Quick break. See you after this to say goodbye.